Johnny's journey into the forest had begun like so many others, filled with the promise of peace, solitude, and a connection with the natural world. He loved being among the towering trees, listening to the rustling leaves and birdsong that filled the air. An avid traveler and nature enthusiast, Johnny sought out remote locations to escape the hustle of everyday life and recharge his spirit. On this particular day, the weather was crisp, the sunlight filtering through the dense canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the ground. As he trekked deeper into the forest, Johnny felt the familiar sense of calm that always came over him in the wilderness. He followed a narrow trail winding through the trees, taking in the scent of pine and earth. With a lightweight backpack slung over his shoulders, he carried only the essentials: water, a first aid kit, some snacks, and a small camera for capturing the beauty of his surroundings. He didn't anticipate needing anything more. After all, this was supposed to be a leisurely hike. But as the hours passed and the sun began its slow descent, the serene atmosphere shifted. The forest grew quieter, the usual chatter of birds replaced by an unsettling stillness. Johnny couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. He paused, scanning the area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Dismissing his unease as an overactive imagination, he continued on, though his pace quickened slightly. Then the sound came, a low, guttural noise that stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't a growl or a roar, but something more plaintive, almost like a cry. It was faint at first, carried on the wind, but it grew louder as Johnny strained to pinpoint its source. His heart raced, adrenaline flooding his system. Was it an injured animal? Or worse, the call of a predator staking its territory? Summoning his courage, Johnny followed the sound, veering off the trail and into the underbrush. He moved cautiously, his every step deliberate to avoid startling whatever was out there. The noise grew louder, more distinct, and Johnny realized it wasn't just a cry. It was layered with a rhythm like a plea for help. He pressed on, his pulse pounding in his ears, until he emerged into a small clearing. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was a bear. Not just any bear, a massive brown bear with a hulking frame and a commanding presence. Johnny froze, his instincts screaming at him to retreat, but something in the bear's eyes stopped him. She wasn't acting aggressively. There was no warning growl or charge. Instead, she looked at him with an intensity that was almost human, her eyes wide with what could only be described as desperation. For a moment, Johnny didn't move, his mind racing through every piece of advice he'd ever heard about bear encounters. Stay still. Make yourself appear larger. Back away slowly. But the bear didn't advance. She stood her ground, her gaze locked on his, as if trying to communicate something beyond his understanding. Johnny's fear gave way to curiosity. He noticed her body language, tense but not hostile, her massive paws planted firmly on the ground. She turned her head slightly, glancing toward the trees behind her, then back at Johnny. It was a deliberate motion, almost as if she were beckoning him. Johnny hesitated, his rational mind warning him of the dangers, but another part of him, the part that loved the mystery and beauty of nature, urged him to follow. Taking a deep breath, Johnny took a tentative step forward. The bear didn't move. Encouraged, he took another step, then another, each one slower than the last. The bear waited, her eyes never leaving him. When he was just a few feet away, she turned and began walking, her movements purposeful and steady. Johnny followed at a cautious distance, his heart pounding with every step. The path the bear led him on was narrow and overgrown, winding through the dense forest. Johnny couldn't help but marvel at the surrealness of the situation. Here he was, following a wild animal into the unknown, driven by nothing more than a gut feeling, and the unspoken plea in her eyes. The bear glanced back occasionally, as if to ensure he was still following, her massive form cutting an imposing figure against the dappled sunlight. The journey seemed to stretch on forever, the forest around them growing denser and darker. Johnny's mind raced with questions. What was she leading him to? Was this some kind of trap? And yet, despite his fear, he couldn't bring himself to turn back. There was something about the bear's demeanor that compelled him to trust her, a strange sense of purpose in her movements that he couldn't ignore. Finally, they emerged into another clearing, this one larger and dominated by a roaring river. The water was icy and fast-moving, its surface glittering in the fading sunlight. Johnny's eyes were immediately drawn to a small figure clinging to a piece of driftwood in the middle of the current, a bear cub, its tiny body barely holding on against the force of the water. The mother bear let out a low, mournful sound, her gaze shifting between Johnny and her struggling cub. Johnny's heart clenched as he took in the scene. The cub was in danger, its grip slipping with every passing second. There was no time to think. Without hesitation, Johnny dropped his backpack and jacket, bracing himself for what he was about to do. The icy water hit him like a wall, stealing his breath and numbing his limbs, but adrenaline and determination drove him forward. Each stroke felt like a battle against the relentless current, but Johnny pushed on, his eyes fixed on the cub. The mother bear paced along the riverbank, her cries growing more frantic with every second. As Johnny reached the cub, the piece of driftwood it clung to was swept away. The tiny bear flailed helplessly, its claws scraping against Johnny's arms as he carefully scooped it up. Holding the cub above the water to ensure it could breathe, Johnny began the arduous journey back to shore. The current fought against him, pulling at his legs and threatening to drag him under, but he refused to give up. Finally, he reached the riverbank, his body aching and his lungs burning. He gently set the cub down beside its sibling, both of whom huddled together under their mother's watchful gaze. Exhausted and drenched, Johnny sat back, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he tried to process what had just happened. Johnny stood on the riverbank, drenched and shaking, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps as he looked at the two bear cubs huddled together beneath their mother's watchful eyes. The rescue had left him physically drained, yet the adrenaline coursing through his veins kept him alert. The mother bear stepped closer, her massive frame towering over Johnny. Every instinct screamed at him to back away, but something about her eyes made him hold his ground. The mother bear tilted her head, studying him intently. Her gaze was neither threatening nor hostile. It was filled with something that Johnny couldn't quite put into words. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of the risk he had taken. She let out a low, rumbling growl, but it wasn't menacing. Instead, it felt almost like an acknowledgement, a way of saying, "I see what you've done." Johnny's heart pounded as the bear took another step closer, her sheer size a stark reminder of the danger he was still in. He remained still, not daring to make any sudden movements. Slowly, the bear extended her massive paw and rested it lightly on his shoulder. The gesture was so unexpected, so human-like, that Johnny almost laughed out loud despite the gravity of the situation. It was as if she was saying thank you, in the only way she could. The two cubs watched from behind their mother, their tiny bodies trembling as they nestled together for warmth. Johnny felt a pang of sadness as he realized how close they had come to losing their lives. The river's icy currents were unforgiving, and without intervention, they wouldn't have stood a chance. He looked back at the mother bear, who now seemed to be regarding him with a sense of calm. She let out a soft, guttural sound and nudged her cubs forward with her nose. To Johnny's astonishment, the cubs hesitated for only a moment before toddling toward him. Their tiny paws barely made a sound on the soft earth as they approached, their wide eyes filled with curiosity. One of them sniffed at his hand, its wet nose cold against his skin. The other cub let out a small, tentative growl, as if trying to mimic its mother. Johnny couldn't help but smile, overwhelmed by the sheer surrealness of the moment. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling as he gently stroked the fur of the braver cub. Its coat was thick and slightly damp, the texture coarse yet oddly comforting. The cub made a soft, contented noise, and Johnny felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was a connection he never could have anticipated, a bond forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. The mother bear watched silently, her massive head tilted slightly to one side. Johnny got the sense that she was testing him, gauging his intentions toward her offspring. When the cubs eventually returned to her side, she nudged them gently with her nose, her maternal instincts kicking in as she began grooming them with long, deliberate strokes of her tongue. Johnny took a step back, sensing that it was time to leave. The mother bear seemed to understand, her eyes meeting his one final time before she turned and began leading her cubs away. Johnny watched them disappear into the forest, their silhouettes fading into the dense foliage. For a moment he stood there in stunned silence, replaying the events in his mind. But the story didn't end there. Over the next few days, Johnny found himself unable to stop thinking about the bear family. The memory of their encounter replayed in his mind like a vivid dream, each detail etched into his consciousness. He decided to return to the area, not to seek out the bears specifically, but to continue his exploration of the forest. Deep down, though, he hoped for another encounter, curious to see if the connection they had formed was more than just a fleeting moment. His wish was granted sooner than he expected. While hiking along a different trail near the river, Johnny heard a rustling in the underbrush. He froze, his heart racing as he scanned the area. From the dense foliage, the mother bear emerged, her cubs trailing behind her. This time, her demeanor was different. She seemed calm, almost serene, as she approached him with slow, deliberate steps. Johnny noticed something unusual. The mother bear wasn't alone. Behind her, several other adult bears appeared, their massive forms blending into the shadows of the forest. Johnny's instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay rooted to the spot. The bears formed a loose circle around him, their movements deliberate and unthreatening. It was as if they were creating a protective barrier. It wasn't until Johnny saw the glint of golden eyes in the distance that he understood why. A mountain lion, sleek and muscular, crouched low in the underbrush, its predatory gaze fixed on him. Johnny's breath caught in his throat as he realized the danger he was in. But before he could react, the bears let out a series of low, guttural roars, their collective voices shaking the air. The mountain lion hesitated, its predatory confidence faltering in the face of the bear's unified presence. One of the larger bears stepped forward, its body tense and ready to defend. The mountain lion snarled, but ultimately turned and slunk away into the shadows, defeated. Johnny stood there, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The bears had protected him, risking their own safety to drive away the predator. It was a debt repaid in the most extraordinary way, a testament to the bond that had been forged between him and the mother bear. She looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with a sense of quiet understanding, before leading her cubs and the rest of the group back into the forest. Johnny knew he would never forget this encounter, a story that would stay with him for the rest of his life. It was a reminder of the profound connections that could be formed between humans and animals, even in the wildest and most unpredictable of circumstances. As he made his way back to civilization, Johnny couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of wonder and respect for the natural world, knowing he had been a part of something truly extraordinary. Johnny's life had returned to its routine, yet his thoughts often drifted to the extraordinary events in the forest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the cubs' innocent faces and the mother bear's penetrating gaze. The memory of the bears forming a protective circle around him against the mountain lion lingered, filling him with a mix of gratitude and awe. It wasn't just an encounter, it was a moment that reshaped his understanding of nature, courage, and connection. The story began to spread through his local town, though most dismissed it as an exaggerated tale. People scoffed at the idea of wild bears protecting a human, chalking it up to Johnny's overactive imagination. But Johnny didn't mind. He wasn't telling the story for validation. He spoke of it because it had changed him. Those who were willing to listen heard a story that carried an undercurrent of truth so profound it was hard to ignore. Johnny, however, felt a strong pull to honor the bears and the bond they had formed. He decided to return to the forest, not in search of another encounter, but to express his gratitude in some tangible way. He brought supplies to plant native berry bushes, which he had learned were a favorite food for black bears. He hoped it would be his way of giving back to the land and creatures that had given him so much. On his third visit to the area, Johnny noticed signs that the mother bear and her cubs had been nearby. Fresh paw prints were embedded in the soft earth, and claw marks adorned a tree near the river. He felt an inexplicable warmth knowing they were still around. He left the area quietly, not wanting to disturb them, but the marks on the tree felt like a silent acknowledgement, a reminder that they were watching. Months later, as winter began to set in, Johnny received an invitation to speak at a local wildlife conservation seminar. Reluctant at first, he eventually agreed, deciding this was an opportunity to share his story not as a mere anecdote, but as a testament to the interconnectedness of life. The room was filled with skeptics and enthusiasts alike. Johnny spoke with humility and passion, recounting the events in vivid detail. By the end, the audience was silent, not out of disbelief, but out of reverence for what they had heard. A wildlife photographer approached Johnny after the seminar, deeply moved by the story. He proposed collaborating on a documentary that could showcase not just Johnny's experience, but also the importance of protecting wildlife and their habitats. Johnny hesitated, but ultimately agreed, realizing this could be the larger purpose he had been searching for. Together, they spent months in the forest, capturing the beauty of the bears, the river, and the vast wilderness. To Johnny's amazement, the mother bear made another appearance during their filming. She seemed to recognize him, her body language calm and composed. This time she was alone, her cubs likely grown and independent. Johnny felt a profound sense of closure and gratitude, as if the bear had come to see him one last time. The footage of her became the centerpiece of the documentary, symbolizing the delicate balance between humans and nature. The documentary, titled The Bond Beyond, premiered to critical acclaim. It brought attention to the plight of black bears and their shrinking habitats, sparking a movement to preserve wilderness areas. Johnny became an advocate for wildlife conservation, traveling across the country to share his story and the lessons he had learned. He often ended his talks with a simple message: when we act with courage and kindness, we open the door to miracles. Years later, Johnny revisited the forest with his son, a teenager who had grown up hearing his father's story countless times. Together, they walked the trails, Johnny pointing out the river where he had saved the cubs and the tree with the claw marks. Though they didn't encounter any bears that day, Johnny felt their presence in the rustling leaves and the whisper of the wind. It was a reminder that some bonds transcend words, existing in the quiet spaces between fear and trust, between survival and compassion. The story of Johnny and the bears became a local legend, passed down through generations. To Johnny, it was never about fame or recognition. It was about understanding that sometimes the most extraordinary connections happen when we least expect them, and they leave us forever changed. In conclusion, Johnny's extraordinary encounter with the bear family underscores the profound and often mysterious connections between humans and the natural world. This story is not merely about courage or survival. It is a testament to the power of empathy and instinct, transcending species boundaries. Johnny's willingness to take a leap of faith, risking his life to save the drowning cubs, was met with an equally selfless act of protection from the mother bear. The bear's actions were a reminder that kindness creates ripples, often returning to us in ways we cannot foresee. From Johnny's personal transformation to his advocacy work, his story inspired countless others to re-examine their relationship with wildlife and the environment. The documentary, The Bond Beyond, became a catalyst for change, igniting conversations about coexistence and conservation, while the mother bear's legacy lived on as a symbol of gratitude and trust. This tale reminds us of the delicate balance in nature and the enduring truth that compassion knows no bounds. Johnny's journey wasn't just a remarkable adventure, it was a life-altering experience that showed how acts of kindness, no matter how small, can bridge the divide between humans and the natural world, leaving an indelible mark on all involved.